We are using Zoom webinar for this meeting. Attendees must register to participate, and the registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description on the agenda. People registering as an attendee must use their names. This is going to be a workshop format, so there won't be active public comment today. This will just be conversation amongst board members and the presentation as we go through the agenda. This open meeting of the Select Board is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment as previously noted. For this meeting, the Select Board is convening by video conference via Zoom webinar as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to share the screen of your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording, unless of course, as they go through and want to share screens. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless we note otherwise. And we will not be doing voting today. We will be doing polling. And I will turn it over to Mary Longacre to call her meeting to order.
I'd like to call the meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to order. I do see we have a quorum here. I'm not going to take roll call, and we are meeting under the same conditions that Dawn previously mentioned. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Kate Edwards with Arcadis, and I think we have a presentation slide coming up shortly, but yes, this is a workshop format. We have met with 2 other groups in this round of focus group meetings for Baxter Road, and this group is the town group, which consists of the Select Board, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, and staff from the town who are invited. So we may not be familiar with every single one of you quite yet. So if during Q&A you have raised your hand, and we may ask if you can just repeat who you are and your affiliation so that we can be sure that we're getting correct participation in the workshop format. We're also going to put Vince Murphy's email address in the chat. If today public folks who are listening in have questions that they would like to be answered directly by Vince, he can field some of those questions later on. But we welcome everybody's participation here today, and we're excited to show you what we've been working on. All right, Karen, I'll let you put up the slides. All right, so welcome. Here we are for this is, like I said, the 3rd group meeting of the 2nd round of focus groups. This will not be the last time that we meet with folks. We do have additional meetings that will be coming up. And we just wanted to kind of give everyone an opportunity to look through the work we've been doing. We've been, we last met in March, and we've been doing some alternatives analysis and looking through what alternatives may be feasible here for Baxter Road. And so we're presenting those today. They are by no means final. Part of the process is bringing these potential solutions to focus groups and sort of vetting them and getting some more input and feedback from you all. So, next slide. Today's facilitation team here today, we have Dr. Karen Bolter, Dr. Irene Watts, Ryan Brong, who's been putting together all the many documents that have been sent to us, and me, Kate Edwards. And we did full bios and introductions last time, but we're happy to send out any information on that later to anybody who requests it. And really today we want to talk about the vision for our desired outcomes. What are the considerations for the alternatives assessed in the Baxter Road feasibility assessment? What are the associated implications for potential scenarios? And that's not all completely fleshed out yet. We're still talking through those and including you all as experts in the place you live. And how can we plan out potential future scenarios or adaptation pathways for addressing bluff erosion on Baxter Road along different planning horizons? So there's near term, midterm, and long term.
Thanks, Kate.
You're
So we're going to start off with some polling. As we said, everyone's going to be muted and we'll unmute at the end for discussion when we can go back to any of the slides. So please do put your questions in the chat. We really want to hear from people we haven't heard from. So please ask questions. Stay mentally and physically present, listen actively, and you can contribute to the meeting goals, sharing ideas and questions through the chat, but also we're going to be doing some polling. So I have put this link into the chat. All you have to do is on your browser, go to pollev.com/kbolter833, and we'll do the first poll. So when you go there to the poll, it should look, oops, it's going to look something like this. So the first, so that's where you can put in your answer. So the first, we already have someone that put in a response for the first one. We wanted to know, we're going to look at long-term, but short-term between now and 2030. These are open response answers. You can put as many as you want. We want to know a vision of, something outside the box, or, what are you concerned about, and what is an outcome that could address that? And another thing you'll notice is there's these thumbs up or thumbs down little next to the first answer submission. So if you click thumbs up, then you see the number, there's a counter here for things going up. So there's 5 thumbs ups for this one. So it seems like 7. There's a lot of people that really want to see consensus. And by the way, if you're having trouble with the poll everywhere, I can input the answer for you. So if you can even send me, how it says in the chat, to everyone, you could click down and, just specifically to me, Karen Bolter, you could tell me what response you would like recorded and I'll put it in for you. So it seems like it's pretty unanimous that 13 people just want to see some sort of consensus with the goal. That's great. And here we have a short-term and long-term path identified. And that's really what this meeting is about, these short-term and long-term paths.
I just want to clarify that polling should be answered by workshop participants only.
Yes. So we got save Baxter Road in the long term and access to the lighthouse. And here's one more. Would like to see a long-term sustainable outcome. I like how you guys are using all the upvoting. It's good. Planning and preparation for relocation and save the road. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. The next one is looking out. So this was short term. Oh, here's another good one. How to transition from the existing. Where did that go? It's here. So 3 more. From the existing project to a long-term strategy. Save not only Baxter Road in the long term, but also the rest of the island's shoreline roads. These are all great. Thank you. So like I said, the next thing we're going to do is go to another poll. So it should, in your browser, it should disappear, the previous question, and you have a new new rectangle where you could put a response of long-term going out to 2070, 2100. What does a resilient Baxter Road look like to you? What are the parts of it that, how do you envision them long-term adapting on Baxter Road? So we have saving Baxter Road and the lighthouse, if at all feasible. A vision that doesn't need constant engineering support to exist. All right, I'll give it another minute. And then, oh, save without negatively impacting others. Move to a location where it doesn't require enormous funding. A sustainable way to maintain the infrastructure. Houses not on the edge, but moved inland. All right, we got some great answers. Let's move on to our last open response. And, you know, a lot of you have mentioned already why this outcome is important to you for this project, things like the lighthouse. Maybe it's the bluff walk or beach access. So we have build consensus and stop with endless litigation. It is a microcosm of the issues facing the larger island. It is the start of adapting the whole island to climate change and sea level rise. The bluff walk is an intrinsic part of the Sconset experience and Sconset history and absolutely worth preserving. Acting as a community instead of individual interests and setting an example for the future. These are great. We're getting a lot here. The unique ecological and cultural area of the island, both history and ecology are important. Long-term sustainability of a beautiful, unique place, and history, the lighthouse as a historic landmark. All right. But it looks like our top answer is very similar to the last one, consensus. All right. So next, we're going to go over the project mission, and we're going to have a vote for the project name as well after that. So you can go through that, Kate, please.
Great. All right. So now that we've warmed up with some polling, the last time we were together with all of the groups, we talked about the project mission, and we put something forth sort of based on our experience, what we had heard, and what was put in the scope of work, and took into consideration the information and feedback from you all, and we've revised the statement. So it now reads the project name, which we'll get to in a minute. We'll create a community-supported actionable roadmap to implementation of short and long-term solutions for the Baxter Road area that help the community respond to rising seas and eroding coastlines through adaptation practices such as protection, accommodation, shoreline realignment, sometimes also called retreat, or no action. The goal has really been to compare alternatives and develop a concept plan for moving forward based on both industry standard types of analyses based in the science that we see and the data that the best available data that was provided to us, and the community engagement. The challenge, as the #1 polling answers show, has been finding a solution that's really supported throughout the community. So we're continuing to bring our alternatives analysis today before you and get some feedback. So today we wanted to show some of the project names that we thought might be good for the project. Some of these are out of basically we got a lot of thematic names in our last session. So we've picked kind of the top 4 and would like to hear from you all on if there's a better name for this project.
Interesting. One of our meetings, the first one, A, was the top, and then another one, B, was the top. And here we have C as the top. All right, we can move on, and it's still going to be open for you to vote.
Great. So a little bit about sort of where we are at in the scope of work and the project. We've collected existing information. Thank you so much for sending all the documents to us. We've tried to summarize some of the key documents. I think we received about 500 documents. The registry is now available for you all to look on. There's a Baxter Road project website on the town website, and we have put the registry of documents there. We last met in March and early April with the 3 stakeholder groups. The alternatives that we're presenting today are partially complete, is how we consider them. They haven't been ranked yet. We're vetting them. We want to know if we have the pros and cons right, what else we may not have considered, what are the community priorities around these alternatives. We are experts in our fields and science, but you are experts on the place you live and work and play. So we want to understand your perspectives and preferences, things we might have not really thought of. And we'll integrate that feedback as we present the alternatives and start to work on the adaptation pathways exercise. So that's where we're at we're kind of at number 3. And then in very early September, we expect to be able to deliver the draft summary of findings. So right around Labor Day. So we have begun targeting the date there for a draft. And I'm going to turn it over to Irene for a walk through the alternatives. As I said, this is kind of this is a lot of work, so we're going to be talking at you for a bit. But as Irene goes through these alternatives, we're going to try and pause and take some questions from the chat. So if you have clarifying questions, please try to type them into the chat. And after each alternative, we will try to pick some of those questions and throw them at Irene, and she'll do her best to answer them. Then we're going to go through a couple other short pieces of information and an exercise in doing the adaptation pathways. And after that, we will have left time for a larger Q&A discussion. So that's kind of the format from here up. Go ahead, Irene.
Thank you, Kate. So the first thing I want to go over is a discussion of the approach to the selection of the alternatives. And I'd like to emphasize that the alternative analysis assumes that the current system comes into compliance. This analysis was performed from both an engineering perspective as well as a coastal processes perspective. We wanted to really tightly link the components of any engineered system to the coastal processes that it's addressing. I also want to highlight the fact that bluff protection cannot be achieved at this location without tow stabilization. It's a really important component. Therefore, alternatives that provide bluff protection include tow stabilization. We did explore some other forms of innovative protection methods, but a lot of them wouldn't provide the tow stabilization that we really needed for this very unique shoreline. And I also want to recognize that the removal of the current system and replaced with any other form of tow stabilization would also have both environmental and cost implications. And it's good to recognize that any sort of perturbation to the system, whether you're constructing something or removing something, the system, the coastal system, will take time to establish a new dynamic equilibrium. We move forward with these considerations, and the analysis that was completed with the existing system in place for most of the alternatives and also changing a single variable each time so that we could understand the response of the coastal system, potentially in a conceptual level, to changes to the constructed system. Next slide. The first thing I want to go over is, what does the current system address? Since we're really tightly linking the components of the system, I wanted to break it down, what's actually out there today and what is it trying to address from a coastal processes perspective. We really need to account for the existing system and understand its primary function is to provide that tow protection. So a quick little definition is tow protection protects the toe of the bluff, the base of the bluff, from wave action, which can erode the bluff, leading to episodic collapse. The other component of this, a very important component, is dune nourishment. So material is added on top of the geotubes, the tow protection, to a template. So it's when I refer to a template, what I mean is it's coming up to a predefined shape, a design template with a predefined volume. And what it's doing is acting in two ways. It's adding material to the littoral system and the sediment budget and acting as a buffer to the geotubes. Thirdly, bluff stabilization is providing, is addressing aeolian or wind transport. And I also want to highlight here best management practices for managing surface drainage. Next slide. So moving into the approach for evaluating the alternatives, how did we go about taking all of the different coastal engineering ideas and coastal approaches? And we really came up with this tiered approach to reflect both a broad scale categories and some very specific categories to provide that ability to examine the primary drivers between different categories. So for example, if we found that one had a greater impact on the coastal processes, but yet had really large cost considerations, that's something to take into account. And again, we're altering a single parameter between each alternative to examine the differences between each alternative clearly. We were really concerned if we had changed too many different pieces of the puzzle all at the same time, we wouldn't be able to understand those trends that we were really looking at. And again, all of the changes are closely linked to the coastal process being addressed and its function. The broad categories are listed here between the functional coastal processes, ecological and habitat considerations, and finally cost considerations. And I did want to highlight here that Matrix is simply a tool to assist in examining different trends and agreements between alternatives. And I have on the next slide a diagram of kind of a mind map, which demonstrates the process of selecting these different alternatives. So if you want to take a look at the top, we came up with a few different coastal processes. And so the first one would be a longshore transport. A longshore transport is material that's moving alongshore or parallel to the shoreline. And we ask ourselves, what are the engineering approaches that address a longshore transport? We came up with a couple of different options, groins, nearshore breakwaters, nearshore berm. And then we thought to ourselves a couple of different examples. So for groins, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Jersey Shore. And then we asked ourselves, is this feasible? And the response for this particular alternative is no, no hardened structures are on the beach. In contrast, nearshore breakwaters, an example would be Colonial Beach, Virginia. We asked ourselves, is this feasible? Potentially. And there was some interest by different stakeholder groups that we wanted to account for that. So that's kind of the process that we went through in order to kind of winnow things down a little bit. We move to our next slide. I have a table that describes all of the different alternatives. Kate, would you like me to pause for a question?
No, I think we're good. You can keep going.
We're good. Okay,
I will say we say we have 5 alternatives on here, but we really kind of have 6, and Irene will explain that.
Sure, sure. And I'll just start with that. We also considered no action, and that's really being evaluated by Fema. We'll get into some of the specifics of that as we move forward, and particularly the Fema lines. So these 5 alternatives are listed here, the alternative name on the left side with a brief description, and the coastal processes that we're trying to address with that particular system. So first off is our baseline alternative, no change in the existing system and operation and maintenance activities. Again, that's a baseline, and it's the coastal processes are the current coastal processes that we're addressing with this. Second is the adaptive dune nourishment with the existing system. And what this is incorporating an adaptive management approach to the sediment that's placed on the dune. And that's really speaking to optimizing the placement volume and variations of both erosion and accretion to the template. Again, that template is that shape that's made with the material that's placed on top of the toe stabilization. Thirdly, is to expand the existing system as previously designed, and that would offer a greater alongshore distance of protection. Fourth is removal, retreat, and Baxter Road relocation, and that would entail relocating and abandoning the utilities and access to homes and the lighthouse, and this would return to a pre-construction condition. Fifth, the nearshore breakwaters with existing system. Add the nearshore breakwaters seaward of the existing project. And this, the idea behind this is to add a wave attenuation component to reduce sediment movement in the lee side or behind the structure. And I'm going to go through each one of these alternatives with some pros and cons, and I'll pause, for any additional discussion. And I did want to again add no action. So first off is the no change in existing system and the operational and maintenance activities. Again, it serves as a baseline, and it's essentially proposing no change to the system or its maintenance. So just to remind ourselves, the different primary components of this is 22,000 cubic yards per linear foot per year, with a total of 20,000 cubic yards. The alongshore distance of this particular project is 947 feet. And if we go to our next slide, we have some target effects and side effects. So things to think about of what we're targeting with this particular alternative is to continue protection for the homes and the infrastructure alongshore, continue contributing sediment to the littoral system through nourishment activities. And thirdly, understand that we have a proven constructability. This has been in existence since 2013. Some side effects to think about is the continued cost of sand and monitoring, aesthetic concerns, and finally, overfilling beyond the erosion rate is creating a surplus of sand in the template and may have additional adverse impacts. Some additional considerations to think about, retaining moisture, absorbing vegetation on the bluff, diverting surface runoff away from the bluff, reducing runoff rate towards the bluff, and minimizing paved areas that could increase runoff. So I think we have a couple of slides a little bit later that will address some best management practices for the bluff itself. And I'm going to pause here before we go on to the next one. Are there any additional questions that from the panel?
I haven't seen any come in, Irene.
Okay.
So I think we can go.
I think so too. Excellent. Okay, so the adaptive nourishment with the existing system. And the idea behind this is to incorporate an adaptive nourishment strategy. And the right panel here is a snapshot of the National Beach Nourishment Database. It is an ASBPA product from the Science and Technology Subcommittee. And what it is a national nourishment database that is looking at all the different projects within the United States and what are their volumes, their costs associated to it, and identifying the sand sources. And I encourage you all to look at this website. It's really neat to kind of see, but the idea behind this is I wanted to demonstrate the varying volumes for this particular project in Chatham, Massachusetts, where the length is a little bit longer than what we have right now, but I just wanted to show that the volumes range from 6,000 cubic yards, 1,000 cubic yard to 10,000 cubic yard. And that really speaks to the variability in erosion and sediment transport that you can experience. So the way that this could work is that after the springtime survey, determine the volume necessary to refill the template to its design criteria. So again, that shape that's made with the sand on top of the toe protection. And again, it's optimizing the sediment needs and addressing the variability in sediment transport. And again, also preventing overfilling of the template, which by the report by Epsilon in 2021 has already occurred by 2020, which was interesting. Furthermore, it's minimizing any potential to impact nearshore cobble habitat and the fishing and the concerns raised by the fishing industry. And if we go to the next slide, I have some target effects and side effects of this particular alternative. Target effects, again, we're optimizing that sediment needs to the environment. We're understanding that there's a variation. We're preventing overfilling the template beyond the design. We're also optimizing cost and minimizing potential cobble habitat impact. Some side effects to think about is any variability in budgeting could be challenging and does not directly address sand compatibility. And it's really only protecting a small portion of the road. We're not actually changing any alongshore protection. So some considerations are listed below: the variability in sand needs for year to year. Are there any permitting considerations that we need to take into account? And it may help beach access. And I think I will pause here for any questions. Let me take a look. Oops. We have a raised hand, Kate, by Ian Golding.
You do, and thank you. So I'm a little puzzled, as this seems to represent Epsilon's point of view. I'm listening as the Conservation Commission's representative to CRAC. So I've stayed completely neutral, so I haven't answered, any of the questions. But Massachusetts, the Morris website makes it quite clear that part of the island has lost 240 feet over 40 years, or an average of 6 feet per year. And so that works out as an average of 24 cubic yards per linear foot per year where the geotubes are. So I'm puzzled that you don't seem to have taken into account the discussion that we've had on the Conservation Commission. And I'd like everybody to be, who is on this call, to be aware that there are clearly different analyses of what has taken place. So thank you very much for recognizing me. And it's a very interesting presentation, and I'm very pleased that you're doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure. And I hope that as we move forward within the alternatives, you'll recognize hopefully that we wanted to really look at everything that we possibly could. So in reviewing the documents, I tried to review as much as possible, and I really thank everyone for providing all of the different documents. That's been really, really helpful moving forward. I think there are a couple more questions, and I just want to read them.
Yeah, I would, Irene, we have one from Holly. What is the effect of the dune nourishment along the coast and other areas? What is the effect to Sasakaja Pond when it is opened?
Let me start with the pond because that's of particular interest of mine. And I had some really fruitful discussions with Jeff from the town of Nantucket. It's really an interesting, and I enjoy longshore sediment transport. When he and I discussed how the breaching of the pond is made, so it's, I believe two times a year, the pond is breached in order to meet water quality goals and concerns of the pond itself, in order to exchange between the brackish water to the seawater. And it's really only open for a few tide cycles, and it's really not a whole lot of material. It would likely be a small percentage of the material that moves downdrift, and it closes rather rapidly. A combination between a loss of hydraulic head as the pond empties out, and it's really just as it closes, it's being overtaken by the waves that are driving the alongshore material, as well as that loss of head, and you have this really large tide range through here. So I'm not clear that, I really don't think it would have a really huge impact, but I'm really interested looking, the potential to look island wide from a sediment transport, because a lot of your the front part of your question, which is what is the effect of the dune nourishment along the coast and other areas, I can't really answer that as well as I would like, because we don't have a island-wide sediment budget or an island-wide identification in a quantifiable manner of sediment transport along shore. So there's been lots of documents that try to address that, but I think until you look at that macro scale, it's really difficult to answer that question. So I hope that addressed some of your questions. And I think there's one from Shelley. Is there a point of protecting only part of the road? It seems to be an all or nothing approach. I think that gets addressed in one of the later slides talking about potential or the idea of lengthening this along shore to provide a longer stretch of protection. I think we can move on from here.
Yeah.
Excellent. And the third on the list should be the expanding existing systems. So that would address that prior comment. There we go. So this was previously designed and we wanted to take advantage of that and incorporate it in this analysis. So the idea behind this system, this alternative rather, is to lengthen the system with an additional 2,800 feet along shore. It would include 4 tiers of tow protection to provide resiliency from the 100 to 200 year storm. This would also include bluff face vegetation with either American beach grass or some other native vegetation. And it would also include dune nourishment to cover the tow protection for a longer length and continue the monitoring program. And all of those components are very important for the system to work. I have on the lower left there the proposed greater distance protected north to 119 Baxter Road, which is approximately 900 feet, and then south to 59 Baxter Road for approximately 200 feet along shore. And on the next slide, I have some targeted effects and some side effects. The targeted effects that this particular alternative would be trying to address is to increase that protection along shore for a longer distance. Ample monitoring funded by homeowners, that monitoring would have to increase and that would be a good thing. Increased sediment availability for the littoral drift. So you're adding more sediment to the system and that's going into your littoral system. Some side effects to be aware of, potential side effects. You have an increased cost of maintenance with increased sand and increased monitoring. There are some potential aesthetic concerns and increased sediment needed to fill that larger template. So some considerations is that sediment sourcing and permitting considerations. I'm just looking, I'm gonna pause here for any, I don't think there's any questions with that one. Is that right, Kate?
You're good.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Oh, one just popped up. Do the first 3 suggestions contemplate continued private funding? Is the burden likely to be on the town? That discussion happens a little bit later, and I'll really turn that over to Kate. I'm really more the engineering component of that. Reading quickly. I need to think a little bit more about your question, Peter, but I do want to get back to that. I want to make sure that I'm addressing it appropriately, and also impact on the neighborhood of increased activity. That, Mary, that is a good observation. I live in Florida, for those of you who don't know, and it is a concern as we do our nourishments down here. I live by Melbourne Beach, and we do have some issues with our roads as the amount of truck traffic that goes by. And that is a concern. That's very right. Okay. And I think at this time, I'm going to continue on with the removal, retreat, and Baxter Road relocation. And that's exactly what it sounds like, is that we would remove the entire system and secede or stop any sort of operational maintenance. So the targeted effects of this particular activity would be to return the system to its natural state and cease any maintenance activities. The potential side effect is recognizing the potential cost of moving a home. And I think we had one suggested cost of about $500,000 per home. There's also a cost associated with utility and road relocation, acknowledging that the bluff will erode and that we're no longer supplying material to the littoral system, potential loss of bluff walk and narrowing of the beach. And furthermore, the system may take a long period of time to return to a new equilibrium. And I just wanted to highlight that there. And Kate, would you like me to try to address the question or move on to the discussion with the road relocation work that we've been doing?
I think we'll keep moving. I just want to remind everyone that we're only taking questions from invited workshop attendees. The public, we're welcome to listen in, but we can only be answering workshop attendees' questions.
Mm.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about road relocation considerations. This is another alternative. So I think first I just want to hop back to Irene on the next slide, talking through the FEMA analysis, because our road relocation analysis is based on some of these erosion projections.
Yes, thanks, Kate. I did want to spend just a moment and, just describe what these erosion projections are coming from. The FEMA analysis is largely statistical in nature, and it looked, which you can think of as really appropriate for a longer look, because it is removing any short-term variabilities for seasonal changes. They are employing a linear regression rate using multiple historic shoreline data points. And I want to highlight is that these lines do not include geotubes or any sort of shoreline protection in the analysis. They used a variety of data sources, including historic surveys, including T-sheets and LIDAR data, and their dates really span between 1846 and 2010. So ultimately, we just wanted to highlight here that the FEMA lines are inherently conservative, but still, I think, useful for our purposes here. And Kate is going to take it from here, I believe.
Yes, Irene, one more question, because I know we've gotten it before, but can you talk a little bit about what we mean by conservative?
Conservative. So for the context of this discussion, conservative would be on the high side. So it would, I'm trying to find a good way to describe it, but it's on the high side. It's making sure that it's taking into account everything that they possibly can. So it's just a really broader brush. And in order to do that broader scope, it is conservative. So it is a higher rate of erosion rather than something that is more finely tuned.
Excellent. Karen, I think if we put up the slides, I'll walk through the pieces of the roadway first with the erosion lines, and then we're going to do a little rerouting of the road exercise. Okay. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so what we've done here is we're going to take the length of Baxter Road, which on the left panel you can see there's a sort of a golden highlight over all of the roadways and easements and access out to the beach. Along the shoreline, coming in from the shoreline, you'll see 3 FEMA coastal erosion hazard lines. The 2030 line is sort of that teal colored line. The purple line is 2050, and the yellow line farther inland is 2100. These are where we expect, based on these projections, for the shoreline to be at or around those time periods based on the FEMA projections. So this here, we're looking at sort of the northern end of Baxter Road. So you'll see that by 2030, we have homes at the northern end already in front of that shoreline where the shoreline would be. By 2050, the road is well past gone. And by 2100, we're encroaching upon much farther inland. And as we step through the next slide to the next area, we've blown these up a bit. This is the area, you'll see the red circled area shows the blue line where the geotube system currently is located. And again, that 2030 line here actually is on the road. It's not even, outside of the public right of way. These lines do not take coastal engineering structures and other measures into consideration, so no geotubes in this analysis. just where the shoreline would be based on erosion rates over time. The purple line is well past Baxter Road, and the yellow line, 2100, farther out longer term, actually begins to impact Pulpus Road. So the shoreline is expected to be farther inland. If we go to the next slide, as we go down to the southern portion, mid to southern portion, you'll see that these lines start to head out closer to the seaward side. So 2030 and 2050, we're not losing as much in the way of structures and roadway, but still eroding the coastline. And the 2100 is closer to just Baxter Road in the southern version. Okay, if we go to the next piece, here we are further down, and you'll see the most southern end right here of the study area is most of the lines are seaward of the structures. So more more immediate action needed, perhaps up north, and then some additional thoughts for down in the southern area. So I think the next piece is actually going to be, oh, we'll talk a little bit about this, sorry. We do have some relocation options and obstacles. We're going to show you and walk you through one option we've been looking at. Options will require some land acquisitions. There is an existing memorandum of understanding, and you'll see on our map this red drawn area up to the north. That's the roadway layout that was done as part of that memorandum of understanding. So we've overlaid that on our map. There are wetlands and critical habitats throughout this area, so relocation can be a challenge in that way. But it is important to note that erosion will eventually affect non-Baxter Road homes and, of course, the public access, the utilities, and the infrastructure. So now I'm going to share my screen and see if this works. Can you all see that? All right. Okay, is that working? Yes, okay. So I have here sort of the same map. We've taken some things off. We have the former lighthouse location, the new lighthouse location. This is the roadway that was previously laid out to help with access to the northern portion of Baxter Road. And those same lines, so 2030, 2050, the purple, and the 2100 coming far inland. The last time this was laid out, yes, the northern portion is in more imminent danger, but this access road will not provide access or any sort of assistance to some of these properties and Baxter Road into if you think of 2030, it's 2021. I mean, I think of like the 90s as being 10 years ago. That's not true, right? It's 2021. We only have 9 years until 2030. So that's not a lot of time to act. And so near term, 2030 is this line. So it's taking out a good portion of the roadway. And 2050 is not actually that far behind time-wise, but it's moving inland. So what we're going to do is kind of show you that there would probably need to be additional access thought through, and it could go something like this. This is not, I know the fire chief is on this call, so I just want to say, oops, sorry, I would go up here. I just want to say we have not called you to talk through this, but this is just one option we're starting to think about. You know, could it be a paved roadway? Could it be unpaved? Could it be, you know, what width can it be? So those things need to be vetted, but this is just one option. But there's going to be, a bunch of sort of homes inconvenienced, but maybe they still get access that way. So again, we're just walking through the alternatives here. And so this is one option that provides a little bit more access for the homes that will be immediately impacted. And again, this blue line is where the geotube system currently is located. Down here, these green areas so these are habitat areas and these are wetland areas. So you'll see we have some of those all throughout this area. So we've kind of avoided that right now. Doesn't mean that something couldn't be figured out as an alternative. This is just one option for roadway relocation. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And then I think we have some additional slides on this piece. Okay, so we have done a rough order of magnitude type cost estimate for removal and relocation of Baxter Road and the utilities, which does not yet include or really contemplate the cost of moving and demolishing houses, anything that would impact the lighthouse, and acquisition of land. What it does include is sewer and water relocation of other utilities, which could be assumed to be, a shared cost, engineering fees and contingencies. And as we lay it out, we have about $6 million in utility relocation by 2030 and $8 million by 2050. And estimated with other costs, we've right now just it's kind of a doubled cost, but we do know that moving houses starts at around 500,000 just to move a small house. So these are some of the costs we're taking into consideration. This is not fully fleshed out yet, but just wanted to bring some thoughts to you all today. We're going to be working a little bit more on these as we go through. And then I think we have another slide. Here we go. We have another alternative that I want to have Irene walk you all through at this time.
Thanks. So this alternative is Nearshore Breakwaters with the existing project. And in general, the primary objectives of a Nearshore Breakwater system are to firstly increase the fill life or longevity of a beach fill project, provide protection to upland areas to storm damage, provide a wide beach for recreation, and create or stabilize wetland areas. And those are the goals of it right out of the coastal engineering manual. So nearshore breakwaters go by many names, many different approaches. They could be submergent, emergent. They're generally constructed out of rubble mound material. So we wanted to explore this to address the wave energy that's actually approaching the shoreline. And again, this would add nearshore breakwaters seaward of the existing project or an elongated project. And again, it would assist in maintaining dune nourishment and encourage sediment deposition on the lee or the shore side of the structure, so the back side of the structure. So there's a lot of different options with these. All the minutia of gap length, the length of the structures, the distance from the shoreline, that would get flushed out in a more formal design. I just want to go over the conceptual ideas here. So on the left panel here, again, this is out of the Corps of Engineers Coastal Engineering Manual, is the response of the shoreline to a system like this, where you have salience, where your shoreline will undulate in response to the changes in wave attenuation through these types of structures. You can have something more extreme, like a tombolo, where the shoreline actually starts to meet. But the idea behind this is to keep allowing material to flow in the lee side of the structure and not completely stop longshore sediment transport like a groin would. So on the next slide, I think I contrast some target effects and potential side effects with this particular approach. Again, it's helping with erosion. It's helping with sediment transport. It's helping with waves and reducing rip currents, possibly, and can be beneficial to habitat for marine life. Some of the other potential side effects would be less protection with extreme surge. There's a point where they can get submerged and you're not receiving the full benefit of the structures. Potential concern for downdrift beaches, potential aesthetics concern, and cost and time. So some additional considerations is safety, navigation, removals, and the structure lifetime can be about 50 years. And the other component I wanted to highlight here, we do have two guidance documents for homeowners that we're working on for best management practices and standards of practice for bluff stability. First off is controlling the overland runoff specific to coastal bluffs and planting vegetation to reduce erosion and storm damage. And Kate, would you like me to pause here? Oh, I guess we can go on to the relative cost first. So we wanted to go through a thought exercise of thinking about the relative cost of these different alternatives. And that's an important component here when you're looking at a suite of alternatives like this. So we thought about both construction and maintenance costs. So starting with the adaptive dune nourishment with the existing system, you have a potential cost savings by tuning your sediment needs to the erosion on a seasonal basis. Potential construction cost for the current dune nourishment with the existing system could be a little bit more expensive. We kept the maintenance cost the same for that. The expanded system could be more expensive from a construction cost and could also, we need to also recognize that there's more material that is required there. So your relative maintenance costs could increase from what it is today. Removal retreat, Baxter Road relocation, as Kate had highlighted, could be very expensive from a construction standpoint. However, your relative maintenance costs could be quite lower. And finally, your nearshore breakwaters to the existing system, your relative construction costs could be very high. And the other thing that I forgot to mention on the previous slide, in general, as you get deeper, they get more expensive. And it is good to recognize here that we do have a really steep slope, so it gets deep really quickly as you move offshore. So that's something to recognize. However, they're generally designed for 50 years, so your relative maintenance costs could be quite low.
Yeah, Irene, I think along those lines, we have a question from Jennifer. Do you have examples of breakwaters that have been successful in such a high energy system in front of such a steep bank with reduced beach as seen in Sconset?
I need to review some documentation to actually approach that or address that. But you are right. A lot of them are generally more sheltered and more shoaled areas, like the ones that are in Winthrop are actually in really shallow water, and it's in that kind of pocket of the shoreline. But they're well used in Japan and other places internationally, which I would really like to know more about in order to answer that question. In general, in the United States, they've been in lower energy environments. So I need to take a little bit of time to get back to you on that, if that's possible.
All right, and let's see. Okay, this is from Holly. I assume that the relative cost shown does not indicate any grant funding like FEMA's BRIC program. I hope that will be included. So yes, Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about the BRIC program for folks quickly?
Yeah, sure. The BRIC program is a FEMA grant. It's the biggest one. Last year there was $500 million available, and this year it's going to be $1 billion. And all of this funding is available nationally for any type of hazard mitigation project. So those hazards include flooding and erosion. And so to be eligible for that kind of funding, it has to be a cost-effective project. So just, as we're looking at these costs, a lot of the work that we're doing could provide a lot of the content for a BRIC application, just showing that with all these alternatives, we're selecting the most cost-effective one. And as long as the ratio is that the benefits outweigh the costs, it's eligible. So it's a really great program.
Thanks, Karen. But yes, Holly, so these are just straight up, sort of order of magnitude relative types of costs, showing construction costs and maintenance costs, and not taking who would pay and funding into consideration at this time on this particular slide. All right. Shall we go to the next slide? Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to come back around to covering some design tensions and key considerations, things we've heard previously, and kind of ground us in what we've just heard, what our analysis included, what we've heard from you all before we move into looking at adaptation pathways. So one of the things I wanted to just reiterate is that, yes, we are taking the existing system into play here in a number of these alternatives. It does not mean that geotubes will be the toe stabilization that is chosen for that type of alternative. It just means that we utilized the existing system because we had a bunch of data around that right now, real data that exists. But taking that system out and putting something else in does have implications. So that's to be considered. We recognize that we may not engineer our way out of this forever, but we do have the opportunity here as a community to perhaps buy some time before those erosion lines get further toward the road, take down more infrastructure, things like that. There's most likely not going to be one recommended solution from this plan, and we will get into that in a minute. Rather, a set of recommendations or potential solutions out of these alternatives that are mixed together in a near-term, mid-term, long-term framework with specific trigger points at which time you would switch to a different alternative. So we'll get into that a little bit. The things we have heard even today are about the beauty and nature and history of the area. This is a treasured area with the lighthouse, the beach, and the bluff. There's erosion that has eliminated parts of the bluff walk, and other infrastructure has had to move or is gone. We have had some information come in from all sides about, we need to stick to the facts and the science. We have endeavored to take the data that has been given to us through all those different documents, review it, understand if it's within best practices in the industry and good engineering and science practices, and use it to move forward or set some of it aside because it's not necessarily best practice. And we can address those a little bit during Q&A if there's interest from the workshop attendees. We understand that there's design tensions around the sand volume and source, erosion rates, and failure criteria. We have heard from groups about the cobble bottom and the habitat out there. And so we understand that the sand has the potential to impact that cobble bottom, though the monitoring reports that we have seen have not shown that impact at this time. And we've started to look at where could homes and infrastructure be moved to. It's a question that I'm sure that people are all asking. All of this comes under the jurisdiction at the end of the day of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Nantucket bylaws. And so we can offer through this community supported plan, back to our mission, right? When we get to a community supported framework, we will offer a set of solutions, trigger points, and the pathways, most likely, that would work. But at the end of the day, it still has to be permitted by Conservation Commission. So I think that's the framework in which we want to have our talk going forward. The other thing that we obtained permission from the Sconset Civic Association to show you this question and answer that was put forward to the members of the Civic Association in a survey. Question 35 is around Baxter Road has suffered from bluff erosion and several houses have had to be moved as a result. If the bluff continues to erode, access to Sankaty Head Light via Baxter Road may become impossible. Currently, there is only a privately funded effort to protect the bluff and Baxter Road. Do you think the town should support actions to try to prevent further erosion of the bluff? There were 379 folks out of 526, so 72% of responses were yes, the town should support actions to try to prevent further erosion of the bluff. This is a subset, this is one group, a group who happens to live in the area, but just wanted to kind of show another thing that we've heard. One other question was around support for putting up fencing to try and help create more nourishment to the dunes, and that was a yes as well. So these are some of the things that came out of the survey of the folks who live in the area. And I think I'm just gonna turn it back to Irene to talk a little bit about sand, because we've also had a lot of questions throughout the process on sand volume, how it was calculated. We're not diving into the current litigation. We are just going to talk about math, and I know everybody loves a math lesson. So Irene, you're up.
I promise this will not be too painful. Thank you, Kate. I like looking at things in a volumetric standpoint. Going slightly off topic, when I was doing my dissertation work in Florida, we always looked at the system from a volumetric standpoint, from the dune line out to what's called depth of closure. So I like looking at it in a comprehensive manner and understand all of the pieces of the puzzle. And there was an interesting analysis done by Epsilon to look at 7 years post-construction and look at, from a volumetric standpoint, how much material has been put to the template. And they delivered 133,000 cubic yards of sand. And they computed that 91,000 approximately cubic yards have been contributed off the template as littoral drift. And they computed a range of average contribution rate, and this is the higher end, of 14.3 cubic yards per year. And I had a question to them, is how is this volume computed? And it's really length times height times retreat rate. And the height that's being used for this particular project is the entire height of the bluff, rather than just the height of the project itself. So it is inherently conservative by using that approach. And it's speaking to the nature of the bluff itself, where it's not going to come back. Once it erodes, it will never come back. So whereas a beach, the sand can migrate off the beach in more higher energetic times and migrate back onto the beach more quiescent or the summertime times. So that they further went through that the volume of sand placed on the template over these last 7 years exceeded the standard mitigation of sand volume of 80,000 cubic yards. And ultimately, they, that the material that's being placed in this littoral system is larger than the bluff would have contributed over the 7-year period had the system not been in place. And this can result in some negative consequences that they kind of highlighted, where you could have sand that eventually covers the vegetation on the upper portion of the bank, could exacerbate slope erosion, steepen access ramps, and making servicing the template difficult. So that's where this, that they looked at all their numbers and they recommended simply refilling it to the template design annually each year. So that was just an exercise I wanted to go through to understand where the numbers were coming from and how they were computed through time. I think that's all I had for that slide.
Excellent. I think we have a couple other implications we wanted to kind of talk about a little bit, and then we'll jump into our exercise. We do understand that there are other court proceedings going forward that have been kind of delayed and are depending on this project. So we wanted to address that quite directly. We understand the timeline that has come before us most recently, and we are prepared to issue a draft memo by September 9th because we know that that will be ahead of hopefully the court hearing, but it will be in draft format. And at this point, we feel that's the best we can do. We want to be very, very cognizant of the process that's going on here, as well as the linkage to the CRP. They're separate and distinct projects, but we understand that there's a whole island-wide plan going on. And so we speak to that team regularly and work with those folks as well. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so we are currently starting the process of looking at potential tax implications from loss of homes and property in those same timeframes. So 2030, 2050, and 2100. These numbers come from estimated taxes from 2013. We have just put together a list of the homes that will be impacted using those same lines that I showed up on the screen when I was drawing out the road. And every home and property that would be impacted, we have put into a list, and we will be getting some assessors information in terms of most recent taxes, whatever year we can get that's more current than 2013. But with the 2013 data, we see about $20,000 lost in tax revenue for 2030, and then jumps up to the $150,000 range, and goes a little bit tiny bit higher than that from 2050 to 2100. And so this will impact the tax base, and this is really just loss of the taxes from those properties as a snapshot in time. So we have another snapshot in time hopefully coming that's most recent. The other thing we as I said, we are speaking with the CRP team quite frequently. And if you've read the mid-project report there, or you attended the open house, that team talked a little about how we quantify loss. And here's another place where the BRIC funding comes into play, that benefit cost analysis. We understand the dollars and the risk in dollars, right? So one way we quantify loss is through loss of buildings and contents. And this is estimated based on real Nantucket pricing that we received to put into the CRP risk analysis. But it's really only the homes, the loss of homes, no utilities lost, no access, no land. But it is another piece of the puzzle. And what this does is shows that we have started to quantify what could be lost should the town seek funding from other sources. This can go into your benefit cost analysis.
Absolutely. All right, now for the fun stuff. I'm going to walk us through an exercise. There's going to be more polling. And this is, again, what we heard Kate mentioned, that a lot of our interviews and groups, people were talking about this subway map and can we have one? So we created a customized one specifically for you and to look at these alternatives. So what we're going to do now, and this is the last activity before we open it up to discussion. First, I'm going to explain what the adaptation pathway process is. It's documented all over the world and in peer review academic exercises. The gist of it is it's flexible, it's adaptive. You can change your strategy along the way based on trigger points, and you can also not just, we don't have to choose one alternative. We choose one alternative for a certain period or until a certain tipping point, and then we choose another one. So I'm gonna explain how that works. I'm gonna show an example for Falmouth. They did a huge study, the Woods Hole group. So we looked at their example to kind of, you can see what one looks like. And then I'll show examples for how potentially we could apply these to alternatives, just examples. And then we'll show those maps again that Kate was going through, but I redid them so you can really understand those FEMA lines and where they would be with no action. So that, just to refresh your memory, because then we're going to vote through polling which alternative we would like in which planning horizon. So at the end of that, while Kate is leading the discussion and any other questions, it'll only take me a few minutes and I'll adjust the pathways figure so that I can actually show you what it looks like. And, if you have comments that, no, this is not our preferred pathway, we can tweak it all together. So as you go through these, obviously there are caveats. We don't know what we're going to know in 2030. This is something that's just an exercise of what the possibilities could be. So obviously there's a lot of assumptions. but we looked at, we'll make sure that all the alternatives and the connections between them are feasible. So here's just the little diagram from the peer review, a study from 2021. So this is pretty new. So there's 3 outcomes that we look for with these decision-focused pathways. We want to meet short and long-term adaptation needs, promote collaborative learning, adaptive planning, and adaptive capacity, accounting for complexity and long-term change, and including this potential need for transformation. So there's a lot of people using these, and there's a lot of lessons learned that we can dive a little bit further. But here's that example I mentioned from Falmouth. And also, so one thing you'll notice that we didn't do, at the bottom, there are those RCPs, which is basically whether, what are the types of sea level rise scenarios depending on what we do with our emissions. We simplified that, and we didn't use that, so you can just ignore those 2 arrows at the bottom. But what I do want you to focus on is this is a particular road that is flooding already. It's called Surf Drive. So all of these different actions on the left are things that are alternatives to address the flooding. So they could raise the roadway, put a seawall, remove the road, restore the beaches and dunes. Outreach is one of them. So what happens is, as you go through to 2030, 2050, 2070, 2100, those black circles are feasible routes where the city can go. So you can see that red dotted line is the current actions is where it starts up to 2030. And you can see that they've gone from 2030 to 2050. They want to do public outreach and beach and dune restoration. But then they want to move to ending the road maintenance and removing the road. So that was the preferred pathway of the community for that particular road. And by the way, so these black circles, they call them transfer stations, and those are decision points or opportunities to transition or shift. And that can be based on a certain amount of sea level rise or erosion, or how far the bluff is from the road or from a home. It's very flexible, and so we can move along one of the vertical paths when there's a change and the community desires to go a different way. And in many cases, the most beneficial and cost-effective approach to protecting an asset is to phase these different actions over time and keep them flexible, and consider shifting the use of different alterations so you can maintain that asset the best way possible in the future. So let's go, and there's one other thing that the Falmouth example had, which I thought was really cool. It's a scorecard, which provides additional information for evaluating and comparing individual pathways. So it's a lot like what we showed you with those order of magnitude cost comparisons and the target effects and the side effects. So you saw, as Irene was going through the alternatives, we had a lot of information. So here, we put together this scorecard for Baxter Road, which has all the alternatives, and it has those costs and pros and cons all in one place. So it's a pretty good summary of everything that we've looked at. All right, next I'm going to show you an example pathway. So this pathway is just, imagine it was just random Christmas tree. Okay, we're going to do no change until 2030. 2030, that's going to be a transfer point where we change the dune nourishment and it becomes more adaptive. By 2050, expanding the system, and then 2070, removal retreat, nothing with the breakwaters. So that's just one example. So here's another one where you can do 2 things at once, kind of like with that Falmouth example. So we can, decide right away to do adaptive dune nourishment, but that's not going to, maybe it won't happen this year. Maybe it will take a little bit longer because of permitting. Coupling that with the expanding the system, and then adding the near breakwaters, but then also starting to plan removal and retreat. So just one other example. Let's get right to the exercise. I'll just refresh your memory. So the last workshop we did, we looked at these sea level rise projections that we're using for the whole coastal resilience plan for Nantucket. So we're using the high based on the Massachusetts statewide climate projections. So this is the mean higher high water. So it's already today, those high tides, you get 1.5 feet. But by 2100, we're going up to almost 10 feet. And that's why these FEMA lines are going so far inland, because that 10 feet is gonna really do a number for erosion. So we have the same colors here, and you can see the top of the geotube in that red line, and you see all the roads, and the former lighthouse location is already in the area that's vulnerable for 2030, this kind of sea green, and then the purple is 2050, and then the yellow goes very much further inland. So even the new lighthouse location, the lighthouse could be vulnerable by 2100. So just moving a little further south, you can really see here that Sankaty Road would be vulnerable if we did nothing by 2100. And then that little dip to the north there before kind of the lines become a little more narrow and less concerning closer to the coastline, where at the south end, it seems like these homes will be fine. So we're going to get into the polling. Maybe someone could put the polling address in the chat again. So near term, this is what do we want to do up until 2030. So you can vote on either of the alternatives, all 5 of them. And if someone is having issues with voting, you can private message me in the chat and I'll vote for you. I'll put it in for you. Okay, so the adaptive dune nourishment is the most popular one.
Karen, just a quick reminder, this is for workshop participants only.
Thank you, Vince. Yeah, please do not vote if you were not invited to the workshop. Okay, so next we're gonna, so if right now the way that it looks like we have with half of the respondents going for the adaptive dune nourishment, what would happen, we would do that up until 2030. And then we'll go to the next, it's not advancing the slides. There we go. Oh, 2050. So going out to 2050. Okay, so some people are considering the nearshore breakwater. We'll give it another minute. All right, so it looks like by 2050, removal and retreat is where we want to head. And what about 2070, going out to 2100? And I think if removal and retreat was by 2050, it's probably going to be the same. But we'll give it another minute. And then yeah, we have more than half an hour for discussion, right? Oh, so we have a question from, well, I don't know. It's a good point. Combining alternatives and options. I think that if there's a runner-up, you know, if 2 alternatives got very similar amount of votes, then we would combine them.
I also think when we open up Q&A to workshop participants in a few moments, we'll talk about a few things, and then when Karen comes back with the pathways, we can talk about, actually just verbally talk about combining some options.
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up for discussion, and I'll let you know when your preferred pathway is ready. That was really great. Thank you for your participation.
Excellent. So yes, so Sarah, your point is well taken. We opened up today with with just fully admitting that we are going to talk at you a lot, which is not fun in a workshop, I realize, but there's been a lot of information that we've been putting together and trying to put together in a digestible format for you. So we've left about a little over half an hour for discussion. The pathways mapping and these graphics that Karen's putting together as we talk, then we will show them and we will talk through them. So they're not a final graphic by any means. It's just to kind of get a feel for it, put something in front of you, and then we'll talk about them a little bit more. So I wanted to see, Dawn, if you wanted to open it up to the select board for any questions, and then we can open it up to some CRAC members as well.
Sure. Do select board members want to say anything at this time? Lot to take in. Some of those FEMA lines are terrifying. I'm not see, I can't see everyone.
I know, I'm trying to look through as well.
So I would use the raise your hand function if anyone
Yes.
speak. But I mean, I think we should just open it up to everyone.
Excellent. Yes. So any of the workshop participants, if you want to use the raise hand function, and then we will call on folks. So a couple things to address. We are still working our way through some of the costing. We think the alternatives are all generally feasible for this area, but there would be final design and a look at that in more detail as you get into more of a design phase. And I see Gary has his hand up. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, let me unmute. So a couple of questions I have. You didn't address, even though I raised it before, the question of to continue with the current situation, which is being privately funded or even adapted. We didn't talk about who's going to be paying to protect these 12 houses on the cliff. And that is a substantial question in my mind. And I don't take any solace from the survey that the Sconset Association took of their own members. Obviously, if you ask people in other parts of the island, they would probably have different views. The other thought that I have and concern that I have is that with the voting that took place, leaving things pretty much the same with, say, the adaptive approach for 10 years, when you showed us the cost of moving all of those homes on your original chart, it's today. Just think about the unbelievably increased cost that would result if we waited 10 years and then said, okay, now we're going to have to move Baxter Road anyway and move all those houses, and the loss to the tax base will be far greater, and the losses of the value of the residences, of course, would be far greater as well. And that's because we waited 10 years to do something that might be ordinarily going to happen anyway if the storm surges and rising tides continue on the path that they are projected, at least now by the scientific organizations projecting that. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I think to your question of who's going to pay, that's probably not something we're going to have an answer to, but we have some thoughts on, ways that it could be paid for. So we've already mentioned a little bit about like the BRIC funding and FEMA funding that's available. And there are things that can be explored in terms of, resilience districts, betterments, those types of things can go into the funding puzzle, and it may end up being a combination and again, sort of a potential for one option might be a potential partnership between parties, whether that's private and public or otherwise. So those things we can offer as options, but they won't ultimately be our decision. If that makes sense. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Here we go. I had to unmute. Sorry. No, I'm going to sort of answer Gary's. I think part of the issue we have, Gary, is everyone wants their area protected, but nobody wants to pay for it. Now Wisconsin is paying for it, but I think in general, what I see as a select board member is, everyone wants something, but they all want the rest of us to pay. And I think that part of what we're going to have to grapple with, and they had some really good discussions of this on the Remain, the series they ran, is how the places that have enough people and have enough sort of ability to pay, those areas like downtown and maybe Baxter Road or down Wisconsin itself, I think there's a combination that can happen there. Other areas with 1 or 2 homes, it's less likely you're able to do this. There has to be a rational basis and a reason for how we fund this. And I think that comes out of the density and the value and the ability to pay. And that isn't to say rich people get it and poor people don't. It's because there are rich and poor downtown. There's a mix of people, but it's a lot of it, in my opinion, this is just how I've looked at it.
You're muted, Kate.
Thank you. Zoom life. I see Jennifer's hand up, so I wanted to take Jennifer's question.
Thanks, Kate. I put the comment in the chat about having a difficult time voting on alternatives at time steps, because it seemed like there should be an option to combine them as we're working. And, as I think about the alternatives that have been put forward, they all kind of are either we completely protect the bluff or we walk away from it. That's kind of almost seems like an either or. And that kind of avoids the idea of, the bluff walk is important. There's ecological value to how the bluff is functioning. Like there's a protection and an ecological value that exists. And I kind of think it almost seems that there should be alternatives that are focusing on both of those. Are there creative ways to do protection and continue the ecological function without, giving it up arbitrarily, without knowing what sand budgets are and all of that other information that kind of seems important to make an educated decision about this site. But also, if we're continuing or expanding protection, at the same time, it seems like the value is access. So we should be adjusting access at the same time. We shouldn't expand protection and then wait 20 years to, put in new access roads. So thinking about how can we do alternatives that are the best in the long run versus just solving one problem today. And that was kind of where I was coming at it. So I was trying to figure out how to make educated votes on the alternatives.
Those are good points. And I think one thing we should do is throw Karen's, starting point. We'll call this the rough draft. Okay, guys. Throw that up on the screen. And I think this might help us facilitate thinking through some of those things we could do at the same time, because these are, of course, valid points and good ideas. So Karen, do you want to kind of talk through this, and then we'll take some additional input and think through this together?
Yeah, and I think, Matt's comment in the chat and Jennifer's like, yeah, this is, I mentioned at the beginning, this is something very conceptual and visionary, and we definitely, we want more information, but just with the information we had, we wanted something very simple to map out. But to Jennifer's point, I mean, here I can adjust since we're going to adapt and do nourishment with existing system, we can say, and focus on access. So we could do different things with the vegetation and the bluff walk to make sure that there's access to the beach and to the bluff walk with that adaptive doing nourishment. And if there's anything else we can add, if you would like, people who are invited to the workshop, of course, if there's something that you would like to add to the removal and retreat or anything else along the way, we can make one of these tipping point icons and we can do more.
Yeah, I noticed that Dawn has her hand up, so I wanted to see if Dawn wanted to weigh in here.
I just had a few points as we're going through all of this. I really want to understand the actual feasibility of the breakwater option in this location, and I think that that's really important as we're evaluating all of this. And then also kind of the history on breakwaters and how they impact fisheries, because if those are generally used in more like shallow areas, it might not have the same kind of fishing activity that this location has. So it seems like everyone kind of or a lot of people seem to like the idea of trying the breakwater alternative on this, because we know that that the sand is such an issue and so forth. But I'm just not totally convinced that it's a feasible option. The adaptive dune nourishment, I don't want to go too far down that path if it's something that Concom has already expressed significant concerns with, and I don't know if there's a way to work through that. So I just want to as we focus on things, I want to focus on things that are truly viable and not just have us hit a dead end. The other thing in terms of the costs that came up for me during the presentation is to do any of these like house relocations, road relocations, infrastructure relocations, we're going to have to evaluate cost of potential takings. And those could be quite significant as well, and in addition to the valuations that have already been put forth. So I just wanted to bring those few things up to maybe get more discussion going.
Yes, so I think a couple things there, and the team can jump in. Been doing a bit of work around the state and in other locations where you all and Conservation Commission in your town, I'm sure, have all begun to grapple with this idea that the current legislation for the Wetlands Protection Act did not ponder what we were going to do with sea level rise. It was not framed out that way. And so there may be an opportunity where adaptive dune nourishment perhaps isn't something that's acceptable today, because it's not something that they feel, and I'm not speaking for them. Again, at the end of the day, they will have to decide, and they have already put forth a decision a couple of times perhaps, but this is something that's happening in other places, and we wanted to bring that forward for you all. But it may not be something that fits in the regulatory climate right at this moment. But should Conservation Commission or Wetlands Protection Act at the state level start to change to allow for some of these more resilient adaptation methods to be put in place along wetland resource areas, with stipulations and order of conditions and monitoring and all those things, I would imagine it may become an opportunity in the future, if that makes sense. I think I wanted Irene to just quickly weigh in on a couple things that she does know about other breakwaters and in other areas.
Sure, thanks. The comments that were brought up were very good observations to other projects that are constructed in that nature. And I have a couple of resources here that happens to be at my fingertips, but the prototype experience and the functional design of nearshore breakwaters, at least in this country, has been limited to sediment-starved shores with fetch-limited wave climates like the Great Lakes, Chesapeake Bay, Gulf of Mexico. However, they have been placed in other areas that are more wave exposed, like Venice, California, and Sand Island in Hawaii. So some of them are pocketed so that they're bounded by headlands on either side. The other comment that I wanted to bring up is I don't have a expression of wave height. There's a couple of really specific parameters why it's really difficult for me to come up with like a back of the envelope design. I need some weirdo parameters like distance from the shoreline of breaking and length, some other things But I don't have the wave exposure for some of these projects, and that would really help me answer that question in a better way. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that, again, they're not just emergent or submergent. There could be some other style, and a more fleshed out design would evaluate the, really the feasibility, the cost, the resiliency, and the effectiveness, whether or not a submergent approach could be feasible and effective in actually meeting the goals of that type of project, and what level of resiliency. So those are things I wanted to at least just bring up as things to consider. It doesn't, there are options. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Irene. I wanted to, I know Ian has his hand up, so I wanted to call on Ian, and then Sarah, you'll be next.
Thank you. So when we talk about adaptive dune management, I look at the geotubes as being more a form of hard armoring. And so I would say that they're a very different approach. And I'm wondering whether or not you feel it's within your purview to address some of the environmental issues that hard armoring essentially comes with, or whether you feel that's essentially for the Conservation Commission alone. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I know that the final decision will likely be up to Conservation Commission. We have looked at some of the environmental impacts, but one of the things I'd love to hear from you all is if there are perceived environmental impacts. I'm saying perceived in a very broad term, that you all want to weigh in on and remind us of, because in our matrix of evaluation of whether these things are feasible or not, it's a nice reminder, and we'd like to capture that input. So if there's something you all have on top of mind on that, please let us know. And you can do it in the chat, or we'll come back to you. I'm going to get to Sarah next, but feel free to think on that and send them our way for any of the workshop attendees here.
One thing I wanted to say, just your question right now, is to reiterate what Don just said about the fishing grounds there. So thinking through how that does affect the fisheries in that area. It is a big economic resource for the island. But the other thing I was going to say was, or my question was about the weight of the rankings that we just did in the workshop. Obviously, those were kind of quick. Like, we heard a lot of things, a lot of information to digest. And then I'm assuming it was just to get a finger on the pulse of like where we're at. But I think that for me, I didn't vote on a lot of the questions. I don't really feel like I have enough information to be able to say, like, yes, the breakwaters as a theory, like, we know breakwaters in certain areas that work really well, but there's lots of different sizes and materials and distance from shore and how far they're buried and how big they are. And there's so many other factors that I don't really feel like we can say whether or not we think that those would be ideal in those areas. So I just kind of wanted to both put it to you all that we need more information, and I know that you guys need more information too. So just kind of putting that out there, and to also reiterate what Jen was saying about combining effects and thinking through that timeline of, I like that there's the pathways and the breaking points. And so if we make a hard decision, or if there's a decision moving forward of relocating and something like that, there's a known timeline for that to be done. I think that's really important. But I think we just need more information before we're looking at what the alternatives could be.
Right. So I think to the question about the weight, I think you have it exactly right, right? We wanted to get our finger on the pulse. Does anything completely just drop off between all three groups? Does anything completely rise to the top between all three groups? As you might guess, I'm thinking that's a no on all accounts, but we'll keep going. The other thing you can see with the Falmouth example, right, is that there's not just one pathway. There's different pathways. And so we may end up presenting a couple of different options. This will not be the last meeting in which you hear from us and get information from us and talk to us. What we are tasked with next is taking all this information, thinking through it, understanding where there might be some gaps to fill in our analysis, seeing if we can fill those gaps, and then coming back. And what we've been thinking through rather carefully is that there are a couple of meetings left in the scope of work, and how will those meetings be structured, and how can we make them the most beneficial to the process in terms of getting to some answers. We might not answer everything, but I think the framework will be, the objectives to some degree will be really thinking through and talking to you all about what are those trigger points, what would make you want to change the course that maybe you've chosen, or if one thing gets put in place, it may not be your favorite near-term option, but say it ends up being something that we all talk through and is the larger community supported option. And at what point is the trigger point or the tipping point? And what are those going to be? Is it something like the measurement from the edge of the bluff to the road? Is it, as Irene has put it to us, and I know this was a question from Matt, the longevity of the existing system is sort of the same as the longevity of the expanded system. So if you cannot find sand to continue to nourish it, that's a tipping point, right? So that's a point at which we cannot, it's no longer feasible. If a Category 5 hurricane comes in and takes out the system, that's a point at which we have to make a move. So some of those things will be fleshed out through the course of the next few meetings to really lay out what the community sees as important points at which you adapt and reevaluate. And Jennifer, I loved your point about how you can begin to think about road and separating road versus home retreating and access. So that's a great point. Let's see, do we have other hands up? I'm flipping through my grid here. Is it Jennifer? Is Jennifer the only one? Let's go with Jennifer. Do you prefer Jennifer?
Jennifer or Jen is fine.
Okay.
Just real quick, I wanted to make a comment that it seems like that there's a lot of interest in the idea of the breakwaters, and I wanted to make the point that I think there's a lot of interest because it's something new that we haven't done before. And I think for this site, there's definitely an appetite for solutions that we haven't tried that might get us to where we want to be, because we just haven't gotten there effectively yet. And so I don't think it's necessarily that we're thinking breakwaters are an answer, but if there are other alternatives that just haven't been put on island that would be a potential for testing out, that would, preserve both that ecology and protect the space, which is really what people want to get to, I would just encourage bringing those forward to explore for this site.
Excellent. And I would also just remind everybody that the Nearshore Breakwaters does include an element of tow stabilization. So whether it's the geotubes or something else stabilizing that toe of the bluff, it's a system that works together. So we can't have really one without the other. And again, we use that geotubes because we know we have all the most data about it and how it's working now and what's in the ground now, but tow stabilization could be a number of things that might be acceptable to the community and to the Conservation Commission. Any other questions or comments? We have about 10 minutes remaining. Do we want to look at the adaptation pathways at all again and kind of talk through what things might be combinations of things?
There was a comment by Jennifer to separate, right, a little further up in the chat, removal from retreat. I thought that was interesting. No, removal and retreat from relocation.
Oh, yes. Is Mary, are you raising your hand? Sorry, I can't see everyone on my grid, but I just got a notification. Mary, go ahead.
Oh.
Thank you. So one of the things that occurs to me is there seem to be missing elements in these discussions. You know, somebody mentioned funding. There are other things that that I think would be part of any solution that we haven't touched on. And so I'd like more information about whether you'll be including other factors. You know, so you mentioned emergency access. You hadn't talked to the fire department. You know, there are many other considerations in some of these solutions. Will they be included in your proposals further along in the project?
Yes, I think we have some things that will flesh out a bit more to the conceptual level, things that are kind of what we proposed to you today and showed you today is honestly, it's the very short version of a large matrix of things we've taken into consideration. And that mind map that Irene showed you kind of walked through some of those things, but we have a matrix of understanding potential environmental impacts. Like I said, you know, weigh in and tell us if you have more at least perceived, and then we can explore those. And then understanding maybe some suggestions for ways that these things have been funded in other communities. Something like the road relocation, we've laid out sort of a concept, but one of the things is to circle back and say to the chief, you know, what are your requirements? Can you send them over to us? Things like that. So starting to see today if anything would fall off the list or anything was really something over the course of the last few days that everybody was excited about, and starting to understand where things lie in terms of that, and then take those pathways to look a little bit about that. We also have told the other groups that if you all, like, we have a document of some native vegetation for Nantucket. As Irene talked about, the importance of the system all working together. So toe stabilization and vegetative work and homeowner BMPs to prevent bluff erosion from coming over the top, you know, runoff from homes and things like that. But in other areas where there's already plantings or where there could be plantings to help stabilize the bluff in other places, we're looking for some information on you know, if there's, you know, Mass Audubon was in our other focus group. So if there's things that would help with plantings and nesting and things that would be acceptable to the community or are found in other places in Nantucket that you'd like to see ensconce it here, to encourage more diversity and to make sure that habitat is preserved, we'd love to know about that as well. How are we doing? Anybody else that I'm missing? Gary, did you have another question or comment? Oh, you might be on mute.
Some of us are not so expert on some of these remedies. And to me, what I think all of us would like to know is, do these strategies work? Will they really be successful? Because the decisions we're going to make, if we make certain decisions, to start with one plan and see how long, we're doing a trade-off where, you know, we're saying we'll spend a few dollars now and we think that'll work. And then eventually we may have to change our mind, but it's important that we know whether or not these strategies are likely to have the effect that we want, which is to really slow down the damage to our shores that we've been seeing.
Thanks, Gary. I'm hearing that. So I'm starting to hear that maybe the larger matrix, y'all are ready to kind of digest some of the bigger pieces of that after today's discussion, which is fine. That's what we're prepared to do. We wanted to make sure that we had outlined alternatives that seem appropriate for the area. We think they're based in some good science and they are feasible, but we want to talk with you all next then about sort of the bigger picture and all the different categories that kind of go into these things and some more detailed considerations, it sounds like. Is that what I'm hearing? I see some nodding heads. Okay. Y'all still awake? Normally I'd bring you coffee and donuts. I'm sorry, no sugar today, y'all. But soon maybe we can be together. Okay, that's good to hear. So like I said, we're figuring out the structure of our next meetings. And so your input today is also feeding into how those will shape out to be. And I think I'm hearing some things to bring forth next time to really talk it through with you all. Any other questions from the workshop attendees? No. Concerns? No, you can email Vince afterwards. He's been shooting over questions to us as they come in. We're really, really appreciative of your time today. I know it's very hot out there. I don't know about on the island, but it's certainly hot here. And it's probably been a long day. It's only Tuesday, but guess what? It's almost over. And we're so happy you came. We have recorded this session. We will grab the chat as well. So we will have a record of what you all have done, and Ryan has been taking notes. So as with last time, we are so happy that you came and participated, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Vince, do you want to say anything?
Just a quick thank you to Select Board, Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee and town staff for attending, and a great big thank you to all the members of the public that came to watch. Very sincerely appreciated.
Yes, and I will say thank you very much to everybody, and we will, again, this won't be the last time you hear about the project, so stay tuned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually misspoke earlier. We do need to take one vote. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Is Matt and Melissa still here? I know Jason had to leave.
I'm here, Dawn. Sorry, I was on mute.
Could
Yep.
you just second the motion to adjourn?
Yes, I second it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. All those in favor by roll call: Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Matt Fee, if he's still here. I think he's gone. Don Holgate, aye. And I'll turn it over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Don. May I have a motion from the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to adjourn?
Sure.
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
Yes.
Second.
Thank you, Gary, and Ian. So by roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace. I think Peter- Oh, thank you, Peter. I didn't see Graham Durovich, but Graham, if you're here, you can just yell out an aye. Matt Fee is gone. Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Bliss McCurr. Is Fritz still here? And Mary Longacre, aye. So we are adjourned.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. I think this was really, really productive today.
And it's 95 degrees in New York with apparently it's 107 perceptible. It's damn warm.
I
Goodbye,
know.
everybody.
We should be in Nantucket, like Mary said. That's where I should be today. Excellent. Thank you all. Good luck out there.
Thank you, Kate, and to all of your team too.
Bye, Mary. Have a great day.
Thank you.